Just a few months ago, this man received a presidential pardon for January 6th, and now, in a separate case, the government wants to give him life in prison. Let's take a look. This is the Edward Kelly United States Sentencing Memorandum. In December 2022, Edward Kelly developed a plan to murder federal, state, and local law enforcement in East Tennessee. Kelly created a list of specific people he intended to assassinate, including agents, officers, and employees of the FBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Tennessee Highway Patrol, Maryville Police Department, Blount County Sheriff's Office, and Clinton Police Department. To effectuate this plan, Kelly sought the assistance of others to identify his victims' pattern of life and to murder them at their offices, homes, and in public places. Kelly and his co-conspirator also made plans to attack the FBI building in Knoxville using improvised explosive devices attached to vehicles and drones. It was this part of the plan that Kelly actioned on December 14, 2022. Believing he was about to be arrested, Kelly initiated his attack plan by instructing, "Start it. You guys are taking out their office." Edward Kelly is remorseless. He has shown neither a capacity nor desire to rehabilitate. On the contrary, Kelly not only believes the actions for which he was convicted were justified, but his duty as a self-styled patriot compelled him to target East Tennessee law enforcement for assassination. The only sentence sufficient to comply with the sentencing factors set forth in 18 U.S.C. 3553A2 is the sentencing guidelines recommended sentence of life in prison. The United States respectfully recommends the court sentence Edward Kelly accordingly. And here we have, for the sake of clarity, this memorandum refers to the documents filed on the court's electronic record by document number and intra-document number provided by the court's electronic case filing system, just explaining how it's all filed, and we continue. On December 21st, 2022, a grand jury of the Eastern District of Tennessee returned an indictment against the defendant and Austin Carter. The indictment charged Kelly and Carter with conspiracy to murder employees of the United States. The indictment further charged Kelly with solicitation to commit a crime of violence and influencing federal officials by threat. Kelly elected to try his case before a jury of this court. On November 20th, 2024, the jury returned a guilty verdict as to all counts. On April 8th, 2025, the United States Probation Office filed a revised pre-sentence investigation report. On June 6, 2025, the defendant filed objections to the PSR, to which the United States responded on June 13, 2025. Based upon a total offense level of 43 and a criminal history category of, I don't know if it's 4 or 5, I hate Roman numerals, the defendant faces a sentencing guidelines range of life in prison. That's the important part. And we have a little 2 there. If we go down, the sentencing guidelines range measurably underrepresents the nature and severity of the defendant's criminal conduct. Wow, so they're saying it's an under calculation. Given the pertinent statutory considerations at 18 U.S.C. 3553, any variance or departure from the defendant's sentencing guidelines range is unwarranted. Accordingly, the court should sentence the defendant to life in prison. As the court is aware, the court's sentencing analysis is governed by 18 U.S.C. 3553A, which requires consideration of several factors, including the nature and circumstances of the offense, as well as the defendant's history and characterizations. Upon consideration of all relevant factors, the court is to fashion a sentence that is sufficient, but not greater than necessary, to reflect the seriousness of the offense, promote the rule of law, provide just punishment for the offense, afford adequate deterrence, and protect the public from further crimes of the defendant. Consideration of these factors in this case supports the sentencing guidelines recommended sentence. The offense conduct merits a guideline sentence. Edward Kelly's criminal conduct is unquestionably serious. In 2022, the defendant, with Austin Carter's assistance, devised a plan to murder federal, state, and local law enforcement personnel in East Tennessee. The plan included targeting specific individuals for assassination identified by Kelly on a list he created and distributed to Carter. The plan also included attacking the FBI office in Knoxville with various iterations of improvised explosive devices. Motivated by a desire to initiate a civil war and to retaliate for his previous arrest, Kelly was committed to executing his plan. The evidence presented at trial showed that in October 2022, Kelly, Carter, and Christopher Roddy were part of a group chat named Be Prepared on Signal, an encrypted messaging platform. In the group chat, Kelly discussed establishing rally points, meeting location, and to conduct close quarters battle training, CQB, and immediate action drills, all in preparation for an anticipated civil war. Kelly also discussed his plans during in-person meetings in late 2022. At trial, Carter testified that he met Kelly at Kelly's house to conduct CQB training in November of 2022. During that meeting, they discussed plans to kill FBI agents and attack the FBI office, which included the use of improvised explosive devices inside of vehicles and incendiary devices attached to drones. Roddy testified that he met Kelly and Carter at Jarvis Park in Maryville on December 3, 2022. During that meeting, Kelly inquired about the types of weapons Roddy owned, an AR-15 with a red dot scope, discussed conducting assassination missions, and said he had a list of people to target, including that bitch man, a reference to FBI Special Agent Jesse Mann. The gravity of the conspiracy is further underscored by the recorded calls that were introduced at trial. In calls recorded over a brief 30-hour period, the defendant discussed implementing counter-surveillance measures, establishing a course of action, kicking up training and coordinating, conducting immediate action drills, developing a scheme maneuver, creating a secure communications plan, and building a hornet's nest in Athens, Tennessee. The defendant did not simply talk about his plan. The evidence in this case is replete with examples of the defendant taking action to implement his planned attack on East Tennessee law enforcement. The defendant identified rally points, conducted CQB training, and immediate action drills, distributed weapons, qualification standards, assigned roles and missions as part of his plan. Kelly also directed the execution of his course of action in the event of his arrest or the arrest of others in their self-styled militia. Attack the FBI office in Knoxville. You don't have time to train or coordinate, but every hit has to hurt. Every hit has to hurt. The defendant also took steps to access weapons and ammunition. Although he claims to have gifted his weapons and ammunition to a friend, the evidence in the case makes clear his effort to ensure access to his arsenal in order to effectuate this plan. In a recorded call, Kelly informed Roddy that Kelly planned to store weapons and ammo at Roddy's home because Kelly needed them in arm's reach if things are getting the way he fears they are. Although the defendant suggested the volumes of weapons is not too many, as the jury saw, they were certainly sufficient to inflict significant damage. Perhaps most notably, the defendant identified 36 individual federal, state, and local law enforcement personnel to target for assassination. He created a list of his targets, which included names, titles, and cell phone numbers, and distributed copies of his kill list to Carter and Roddy, identifying it as their first mission. The mission packet also included a USB drive containing video images of law enforcement personnel taken during the search of Kelly's home in May 2022. The seriousness of the offense is further highlighted by Kelly's motivations for targeting law enforcement. The proof at trial established that Kelly targeted law enforcement because of their anticipated role in the Civil War that Kelly hoped to initiate because of his animus towards those who participated in his May 2022 arrest in search of his home. Carter testified that Kelly viewed the FBI as an enemy, and as such, they were valid targets in the Civil War because they served as the eyes and ears of the government. Carter and Roddy both testified that Kelly was clear in his desire to retaliate against law enforcement for his May 2022 arrest. For example, Roddy testified about Kelly's desire to retaliate against that bitch man. Again, a reference to Special Agent Jesse Mann. Perhaps the clearest indication of Kelly's retaliatory intent to kill list is the kill list he created. At trial, Special Agent Mann testified that 36 federal, state, and local law enforcement officers identified on Kelly's kill list were all involved in either the arrest of the defendant or search of the defendant's home in May 2022. The evidence on this point is clear. Kelly targeted law enforcement for assassination on account of the performance of their official duties, both past and future. While Kelly's conduct on its own is unquestionably serious, the fact he was targeting law enforcement on account of the performance of their official duties underscores the acute need for the sentence imposed to promote respect for the rule of law. Public servants he targeted were identified on his list because they participated in a court-authorized search and court-authorized arrest. In addition, once he believed he was going to be arrested, a necessary function performed by law enforcement officers executing court-authorized arrest, he gave the order to his cohorts to attack the FBI office in Knoxville. The defendant's conduct in this case manifests his abiding desire for the rule of law. Disrespect for the rule of law, not desire. By the way, when I read this, it's normally through my recording software, so the text is way smaller than it would be for you. A guideline sentence reflects the seriousness of the offense and is necessary to provide just punishment. Kelly was planning to murder law enforcement. He recruited others to his cause. He led and organized training to support his cause. He sought access to weapons to carry out his plans. He identified targets to be killed. Both Carter and Roddy testified that Kelly was serious about his plans. Carter's testimony was unequivocal. He had no doubts that he and Kelly not been arrested, the law enforcement personnel included in Kelly's list would have been murdered. The nature and circumstances of Kelly's offenses are undisputably serious and warrant a life sentence. And now we get to the defendant's history and characteristics merit a guideline sentence. Kelly's history and characteristics is revealed through the nature and circumstances of the offense conduct described above, combined with his continuing justification for his criminal conduct, underscore the proprietary of a guideline sentence. And there's a 3 at the bottom. November 7, 2024, he was found guilty. On January 20th, 2025, pursuant to a presidential proclamation, the U.S. Attorney's Office moved to dismiss D.C. case, and that motion was granted. To be clear, the United States is not asking the court to consider the defendant's D.C. case in reaching sentencing in this case. However, irrespective of whether the court considers a D.C. case sentencing, the United States respectfully recommends this court impose the guidelines recommended sentence of life in prison. So, what that means is he had charges for January 6th, and he got pardoned for them. And this is Trump's DOJ saying, lock him up for life. They're making it clear this is separate from the J6. Lock him up. The defendant is remorseless from even before the instant offenses of conviction through his commission of these crimes up until and after trial. The defendant's conduct demonstrates fundamental absence of remorse, a commitment to continuing his criminal behavior once released from prison, disrespect for the rule of law, and a profound need for deterrence. Even while in the custody of the United States, the defendant justified the actions for which he was convicted. In a recorded call on November 21st, 2024, between the defendant and P.D. Kelly, stated, "No, I'm here unjustly, man. I'm a patriot. I'm never going to apologize for trying to keep your family safe. Sometimes there's casualties. I'm one of them." Beyond merely failing to accept responsibility for his own criminal conduct, the defendant affirmatively believes he is the victim of a crime apparently committed by the FBI, the United States, trial witnesses, the jury, and this court. Rather than evince a desire to rehabilitate himself, he appears proud of his crimes. During a February 11, 2025 call with the defendant stated, "The injustice needs to end. I was wrongly accused and wrongly convicted, and every second I'm in jail is a crime, not just against myself, but the American people and all that is good." The defendant has also directed his ire towards members of the public who served on the jury in this case. During a call with JJ, is that JJ up there too, or is it's JL, and this is JJ. During a call with JJ on March 8, 2025, Kelly stated, "That jury, if they weren't coerced in some way, then they're just fucking idiots. They're misinformed idiots." These calls not only illuminates the defendant's lack of remorse and disrespect for the rule of law, but it also reveals his abetting view that he was duty-bound to murder law enforcement. At several points during the aforementioned call with PD, the defendant equates his conduct with that of the colonists during the American Revolution, going so far as to say during a March 15, 2025 call with BB, "I mean, the fact of the matter is people want to eat their steak, but they don't want to see how the cow is slaughtered." Just making it worse, they're just using the calls against him. These calls demonstrate the paramount need for the sentence imposed in this case to afford adequate deterrence and protect the public from further crimes of the defendant, motivated by his desire to initiate a civil war and to retaliate against law enforcement for performing their official duties, i.e. his May 2022 arrest. The defendant devised a plan to murder East Tennessee law enforcement personnel and took a number of concrete steps to make that plan a reality. Since then, the defendant was arrested again, indicted by a grand jury in the East District of Tennessee, detained pending trial, faced trial, and was found guilty by an East Tennessee trial jury. He now faces sentencing by this court on July 2nd, 2025, and yet the defendant continues to believe in his righteousness of his cause, a sentiment that has been tempered neither by the 2.5 years he has spent in prison, nor by the jury's guilty verdict. Accordingly, to adequately deter the defendant and protect the public, including and especially the public servants identified in the defendant's kill list, this court should sentence Edward Kelly to the guidelines recommended term of life in prison. Additionally, the defendant's history reveals a proclivity for possessing and viewing, I'm going to say CP and hope the video doesn't get demonetized. This aspect of the defendant's history informs considerations such as the need to protect the public from further crimes of the defendant, as well as the need for incapacitation and rehabilitation. I've got to say, that right there, I'm not going, I didn't follow this case closely. That is a big claim to throw in there, right? We've gone through, here he's a danger to FBI agents, according to them, law enforcement, jurors possibly, and now children in general. This is a J6, pardon J6er versus the Trump DOJ. Just remember that as we get into this. This aspect of the defendant's history informs considerations such as the need to protect the public from further crimes of the defendant, as well as the need for incapacitation and rehabilitation. According, the court should oppose the attendant PSR recommended conditions of supervision and consider this factor in determining whether to vary from the guidelines recommended sentence. While the defendant was arrested on December 15, 2022, law enforcement personnel seized and searched the defendant's electronic devices, including a laptop computer. Results of the forensic examination of the defendant's laptop revealed he possessed and viewed CSAM. The examination of the laptop revealed multiple carved. Carved file is the content component of a file that has been deleted by the user but is still located on the device because it has not been overwritten by the device's operating system. Consistent with CSAM, images were part of 6 separate CSAM series featuring both clothed and while Kelly's possession of these images found in his laptop is serious, Kelly's penchant for them was far more prolific. Between 2020 and 2022, the defendant accessed at least 113 known folders with names consistent with, the folder names revealing, for example, you can read those if you'd like. Moreover, the forensic examination revealed the defendant took steps to delete it from his laptop, making it more difficult to capture the full scope of his online activities. So they're saying, here's what we found. And if that sounds bad, there was also an attempt to delete, so it was more difficult to get the full scope, which is kind of hinting there could have been more. Sixth Circuit is reliably empathized, blah, 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 blah. I'm not reading all of that. Sentencing guidelines recommended a life sentence for the court's consideration, irrespective of the defendant's possession of those images. Even if he did not have the images on his laptop, the United States would submit that a guideline sentence is appropriate. However, he did possess the material, and consequently is a factor for the court to consider in fashioning appropriate conditions of supervision in determining whether to vary from guidelines recommended sentences. So, they're basically saying, look, we don't need it, but if you do, conclusion. The defendant has been convicted of conspiring to murder federal agents, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, and influencing federal officials by threat. He targeted agents, officers, and employees of the FBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Tennessee Highway Patrol, Maryville Police Department, Blount County Sheriff's Office, Clinton Police Department for assassination. Those crimes are serious and undeniably dangerous. His history and characteristics, including his possession of those images, evince a lack of respect for the law. The defendant is remorseless. He continues to believe he was justified in targeting East Tennessee law enforcement for assassination and was duty-bound as a self-proclaimed patriot to do so. In this case, the sentencing guidelines have properly captured the relevant statutory factors under 18 U.S.C. 3553. Accordingly, for the above stated reasons, the United States respectfully recommends the court sentence the defendant to life in prison as provided for by the United States sentencing guidelines. So yeah, that is the Trump administration going for a life sentence for someone for their actions that they took. I believe at one point they were hoping to get out of this charge because they took these actions because of the J6 arrest, and it obviously didn't fly. I will say on social media, there's some people that are still calling this man a political prisoner and that he needs to be released, and part of the J6 community that gets restitution and all of that, there is a portion saying that. I wonder how big that portion's going to be after people point to this, because this is public, this is released, journalists are covering this, there's news articles covering this. I found this existed because journalists posted it, right? So I get the feeling that after this gets read through, maybe some people less familiar with this case maybe no longer look upon him as a favorable patriot, but that remains to be seen. There are also people already saying that no matter what his sentence is, Donald Trump should pardon him. And I have to say, I don't think it's going to happen. Imagine if he gets pardoned, right? The fact that he would pardon someone with this charge after his own DOJ pushes it through is going to the sentencing is going to be bad enough, right? Civil War aspect. The other aspects, I don't think the Trump administration wants to tie themselves to, Trump specifically. I think this guy is going to be spending whatever the sentence is in prison. I do not see a pardon, but maybe I'm wrong.